This is probably one of the scariest concepts you can ever think about. This probably actually might be your deepest fear. This probably might be. So eternity, I've talked about that as like our deepest fear, our universal deepest fear. But I think going one step further than this is the concept of solipsism. Now, solipsism is very scary and threatening because the solipsism is the view that only you exist. Nobody else really exists. It's kind of like a dream, right? When you're in a dream, you're dreaming of your parents, you're dreaming of your friends, you're dreaming of good guys, bad guys, animals, but you're not realizing when you're in the dream that all of that is a construction of your mind. It's only when you wake up when you realize that it was all a fantasy of your mind. Your parents, your dogs, your children, everything in your dream was all your imagination. But when you're in the dream, you're not aware of that. And so you think that, your parents are real, that your children are real and all this stuff. But when you wake up, you realize, you can think of it as like, it is real and it isn't real. Like, in a way, so here's two different ways of looking at it. There's two different ways of looking at it. You can either look at your dreams as being real or being fantasy, but really the duality between reality and fantasy is actually very thin. There actually really isn't a duality, and people will think that this is psychosis, that solipsism is psychosis, because part of psychosis is not being able to distinguish reality from fantasy. But I want to challenge the psychiatric world that human beings, what we call reality is consensus. If you think about it, what we call reality is actually a social consensus. And if people deviate from that social consensus, then we call that fantasy, then we call that psychosis. So psychosis really is if your view of reality comes at a detriment to you and to other people. So it still goes back to the consensus social reality, that if you dream that you are God or whatever, and you wake up and you think that Santa Claus is real and all that stuff, we would call that relative to consensus social reality, that those are fantasies, those are delusions. But the thing is we assume that social reality, what we all agree to, is reality and not fantasy, right? But if you think about it, everything that we agree upon, what reality is a fantasy. If you think about it, like money, we all agree that money is real, but it's the same thing as last night's dream. It's just an idea, a concept in our minds. All value is imaginary. The value of gold, it's just a substance at the end of the day. It's just a gold piece of rock in the ground. Like, the value is something that we invent. We invent boundaries between states and cities and land. We create those boundaries, and we also create religions, we create identities. Those are all conceptual realities. They're not physical. And even physical reality, what we call physical matter, like these leaves and stuff, this is solid. Even that can be very conceptual. And this goes into the idea of idealism, which solipsism is basically like idealism, but it goes a step further, and it claims that only you exist. That this video I'm making, is actually, you actually made this video for yourself. That, you might say that, Austin, well, if solipsism is true, then why are you making this video? And I'm like, I'm not making this video. You're making this video of using me to tell you that you're the only one who's existing. So I won't go too far on that. But basically, solipsism is very scary because you are alone. Other people are they're just your dream characters. This is all a theater, all a play for you. It's all a self-deception of you, because dreaming is a form of self-deception if you think about it. And also, you're dreaming. Like, what makes dreaming fantasy and this world reality? It's really just something else that you're imagining, if you think about it, I guess. Like, we create the distinctions between fantasy and reality, but those actually they're not actually tangible. They're not actually rules written in the universe. We are inventing these categories of reality and fantasy, but really reality is a fantasy and fantasy is a reality. It goes full circle. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like inseparable. It's like, because we create a lot of fantasies like money, religion, politics. We create plays, we create sports. You know, you can think of sports as like a fantasy too, even though that sports is like a reality. Like, it is a fantasy because we invent these rules. Like, there's no rule written in the universe that if you go to the end zone, it's a touchdown, right? Or if you go off the sidelines, like, it's all arbitrary, it's all subjective. And I'm kind of going off the point here of solipsism, but solipsism is this idea that you are all alone in the universe, that everything is your dream. You are dreaming, you are hallucinating everything into existence, and everybody is really just yourself talking to you. So I am you talking to you. I'm like a dream character talking to you. If solipsism were true, that would be the case. And we wouldn't, have separate souls because I'd just be your imagination. So that could be very scary. So I just want to keep that in mind, that it's a very scary concept. And there's no way of proving whether solipsism is true or false. So you can't, there's no way of proving it, because to prove that solipsism is false, you would have to prove that you're not dreaming right now, that you're not in a simulation, a matrix. But how do you know that you're not in a simulation or a matrix? Because if you are in a simulation or matrix, anything that you use in the reality that you're in already assumes so anything that you use to prove what you're in is gonna be, I don't know, it's hard for me to articulate this point. It's like, if you're in the matrix and you cite there's brain activity, this proves that we're not in the matrix. Well, but you're assuming that the brain activity is outside the matrix, but really the whole idea of a brain is part of the matrix. You see that it's part of the simulation. So you'd have to see, you have to get something outside of the simulation to prove that you're not in a simulation. But if you're in a if life is a simulation, then you can't prove that, because everything you've ever experienced is a simulation, and you can't know anything outside the simulation because life is a simulation. If you can follow that, because anything you cite outside of the simulation would be inside of it if reality is a simulation, because the whole idea of outside, that could be code for the simulation. It's just like in a video game, right? Sometimes like a video game will make you think there's more to the world than what your character is experiencing, but that's part of the video game. And so you can't cite anything outside of that, because anything that you do cite outside of that could be an argument for it being part of the whole game. So at any rate, so you can't really prove it's false, and you can't really prove it's true either, really. Because another way of thinking about it is that you could say that you could try to prove that you're not dreaming by saying that, well, I can't do math in my dream, but you're assuming that this dream here, that you're assuming that just because you can't do math in a dream means that you're not dreaming. But what if there was a dream where you can do math and you're just not open to the idea? So at any rate, this video is pretty long, but solipsism is very scary. I'll probably make a video more in depth about it, because I really talked more about conceptual realities and all that stuff. So my next video, I'll kind of go more in depth into this concept and how to break it down for you all. Stay blessed.